I drove for 2 hours to the lake house filled with memories of my late wife, only to discover in shock that my daughter's in-laws had casually moved in. Sipping from my wife's heirloom crystal glasses, they said with a smirk, "We're all family here, no need to be formal. Your daughter told us this place would be hers eventually anyway." Looking at the grease on my wife's drafting table, I silently documented the evidence and walked out. They mistook my silence for submission, completely unaware that the hidden camera system had captured everything, and a ruthless blueprint of retaliation had just been set in motion. Thank you for listening. Before we begin, drop a quick comment. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family, yes or no? Your perspective might be exactly what someone else needs to read. Quick note, this story includes fictional elements to highlight the lesson, but the message about protecting what matters is what I hope stays with you. I had designed that house for Helena, calculating every beam and window angle to catch the morning light she loved. 3 years after losing her, I was finally ready to let strangers sleep under that roof. The blueprints sat on the passenger seat beside my coffee as I drove the 2-hour stretch from Asheville to Lake Lure. At 60, I had designed over 200 buildings in my career, but this one was the only structure that had ever made me cry. Not during construction. After. When Helena stood in the study on our first morning there and said the light was perfect, and I realized I had spent 18 months engineering a sunrise just to see her smile, 41 degrees off true east. That was the window angle. I could still recite the load calculations, the foundation depth, the species of oak I had selected for the front door, because it aged the way she said good things should age slowly, beautifully, with character. Helena had died 3 years ago in a hospital room, while I held her hand, and somewhere in that room my capacity for self-betrayal had died with her. The road curved through pine forest, and I thought about the call I had made to Olivia Hewitt last week. The real estate agent had been surprised I was ready to rent the lake house. "Are you sure, Mr. Ashford?" she had asked. "It's been empty since your wife passed. The house was meant to be lived in," I had told her. Not to be an expensive way to store regret. That was true, but it was also incomplete. The fuller truth was that I was tired of paying property taxes on a memorial, and even fuller than that, I was ready to stop visiting a place where every corner held her shape, her voice, the ghost of her morning coffee routine. I turned onto the Lake House Drive at 9:53, 17 minutes later than I had planned, because of construction on Highway 64. The delay irritated me the way small inefficiencies always did. I was reaching for my coffee when I heard it. Music. Loud. Coming from inside the house. I parked and sat for a moment listening. Laughter. Multiple voices. The bass thump of something playing through the sound system I had installed for Helena's jazz records. The oak door was unlocked. I knew because I tried my key, and it turned without resistance, which meant someone had opened it from inside. I stepped into my own house and found it occupied. Verna Brennan, 56. And swirling wine in my late wife's crystal, looked up from my leather sofa with a smile that suggested she had been expecting someone other than the man whose house she was occupying. "Da Mercer," she said, not standing. "What are you doing here?" "Celine said you wouldn't mind." Lyle Brennan, 58. And lounging beside his wife with the confidence of a man who had never paid for anything he could borrow, nodded at me as if I were the unexpected guest. "Place was just sitting empty, right? Family ought to use it." I said nothing. I walked past them into the study. Paxton Brennan, 24, and sprawled on Helena's antique rug with takeout containers, barely looked up when I entered the room he had turned into his temporary bedroom. Beside him, Ophelia Cruz, 25, and photographing my lake house on her phone like it was a vacation rental she had paid for, smiled at me with the kind of friendliness that does not acknowledge trespassing. "Hey, Mr. Ashford," Paxton said. "Great place you got here. I looked at Helena's drafting table. There was a pizza box on it. The grease had soaked through onto the cherry wood surface she had refinished herself by hand over 3 weekends in 2018. Someone had moved her original watercolor sketches studies of the lake at different times of day and stacked them against the wall to make room for luggage. For 36 months, I had kept this place locked, like a tomb, refusing to confront the raw memories of the woman I loved, only to watch these people treat her sanctuary like a cheap, trashy roadside motel. Not strangers, family, Celine's in-laws, my daughter's husband's parents and brother. I noticed the shoes on the floor. No one had taken them off. There were scuff marks on the bamboo I had sourced from a sustainable forest in Oregon, because Helena said a house on water should be built with materials that understood growth and renewal. Then I saw it. The small black lens in the corner of the study mounted behind the bookshelf. 6 months ago, I had installed that camera system to protect the architectural drawings. Now it had captured something far more valuable. "Shucks, we didn't think you'd mind," Verna said, following me into the study with her wine glass. She was using Helena's Waterford crystal, the one her mother had given her. "Celine mentioned you were thinking about renting it out anyway. We thought, why give money to strangers when family could enjoy it?" She walked through the room like she owned it, gesturing at the windows. "The light in here is remarkable. You really do have an eye for design, Mercer." Lyle appeared in the doorway. "Besides, you don't need all this space living alone, do you?" I looked at them both. Verna in her casual linen, Lyle in his golf shirt, both of them comfortable in a house they had no right to enter. An architect learns to read stress points. You learn to see where weight distributes, where pressure builds, where a structure is about to fail. Verna took a sip of wine. "And really, Celine tells us this place will be hers and Julian's eventually. We're just getting a head start on enjoying it. Think of us as family breaking it in for you." There it was, the assumption, the entitlement, the long-term plan I had not been informed of. An architect knows the difference between a structure settling and a structure failing. This family had just shown me the cracks in their foundation. "I'll call Celine tonight," I said. My voice was calm, factual, the same tone I used when informing a contractor that their work did not meet specifications. Verna smiled. "Oh, she'll tell you the same thing. We're all family here, Mercer. No need to be so formal about it." I didn't correct her. I didn't explain property law or boundaries or the 22 years I had spent learning to read a person the way I read load-bearing walls. I just looked at the camera in the corner one more time, then walked toward the door. They thought quiet meant defeated. They had no idea quiet meant I was already building the blueprint. I moved through each room like I was conducting a structural inspection, noting every violation the way I had once documented load-bearing failures. Verna followed me, still holding Helena's crystal glass. Honestly, Mercer, you're being so dramatic," she said, as I photographed the grease stain on the drafting table. "It's just a little mess. Family makes messes." I said nothing. I opened my phone and took pictures. The pizza box. The wine rings on the antique side table Helena had refinished. The muddy boot prints on the bamboo floor. The moved blueprints' original drawings from 2004 now creased where someone had shoved them aside. In the bedroom, someone had slept in the bed Helena and I had shared. The sheets were rumpled. There was a suitcase open on the floor, clothes spilling out onto the rug she had bought in Charleston, because it reminded her of ocean foam. Verna appeared in the doorway. "We didn't think you'd be using it. Waste of a beautiful space, keeping it empty like a museum." I took another photograph. Then I walked toward the front door. My daughter, Celine, 28. And standing in the doorway with a defensive expression I had seen before, usually right before she asked for money, looked at me like I was the one who had violated our agreement. She said, not moving from the threshold. "I was going to tell you. They just needed somewhere to stay for a few weeks. It's not a big deal. I looked at her face and saw Helena's eyes, Helena's cheekbones, Helena's hands gesturing the way they did when she was trying to convince me something reckless was actually reasonable. For 3 years, I had avoided looking too long at Celine because the resemblance was a wound that would not close. "I'll call you tonight, Celine," I said. Her expression shifted. "Dad, don't be like this. They're family. Your family, too. Move, please." She stepped aside. Behind me, Verna called out from the living room. "Mercer, at least take the trash out on your way." I walked to my car without looking back. The oak door closed behind me, not slammed, just closed, and I heard Celine say something to her mother-in-law that I did not try to hear. The drive from Lake Lure to Asheville takes 2 hours if you follow the speed limit, which I always did. Celine called at 10:37. I let it ring. She called again at 11:15. The phone buzzed in the cup holder, and I watched the road. An architect learns early you cannot repair a structure built on a faulty foundation. You can only document the damage and start over with better materials. The third call came at 11:52. I thought about answering. I thought about asking my daughter when she had decided that my property was hers to distribute, that my grief was hers to manage, that my life was hers to organize around her in-laws' convenience. I let it ring. My daughter had given away something that was not hers to give. She had taken people into a house I built for her mother and let them treat it like a vacation rental. She had done this knowing I would find out, which meant she had done it believing I would accept it. Helena would have known what to say. I only knew what to do. I reached Asheville at 12:40. My townhome was quiet and orderly and mine. No one's shoes on my floor. No one's grease on my furniture. No one's wine in my dead wife's crystal. I made tea. Earl Grey, no milk the way I had drunk it for 40 years. I carried it to my desk in the study where the blueprints and legal documents lived in labeled folders, where everything had a place and stayed in its place. I sat down and opened my phone. George Callahan had been my attorney and closest friend for 22 years, and when I said the words on that phone call, he knew exactly which file to open. "George," I said when he answered. "It's time." There was a pause. Not confusion, recognition. "The Lake House file," he said. "I'll pull it now." "You're certain?" "I'm certain." I heard papers moving in the background. George kept physical files for the sensitive cases, the ones that involved family and money, and the intersection where both became dangerous. 22 years we had worked together, Helena's estate, the patent filings, the trust structures I had built when the kids were young, and I still believed proximity meant loyalty. "What happened?" George asked. They were in the house, Verna Lyle, the son, Paxton, his girlfriend, pizza on Helena's drafting table. Celine gave them keys. Another pause. "Celine knew you were planning to rent it." "She knew." "All right," George said. I heard a filing cabinet open, heard him flip through folders. "I have it. Lake House Protection Protocol. Jesus Mercer. I called this the most elegant piece of protective engineering I've ever written. I had hoped you'd never need to use it. So did I. Do you want me to walk you through the sequence? Or do you remember?" "I remember, but tell me anyway." George's voice shifted into the calm, precise tone he used when explaining legal architecture. "First action, formal trespass notice to all occupants, 24-hour vacate order, certified mail and email. Second action, property access revocation, all keys and codes changed within 48 hours. Third action, we activate the surveillance documentation clause. Everything the cameras recorded becomes evidence in the civil case if they contest." "They won't contest," I said. "Verna thinks I'm being dramatic. Lyle thinks I'll let it go because they're family. Will you let it go?" I looked at the photograph on my desk. Helena in the lake house study, standing at the window, I had angled for her morning light on her face exactly the way I had calculated it. "No," I said. "Then I'll draft the notices tonight. You'll have them by tomorrow morning." "Mercer," he paused. "This is the right thing. You know that." "I know." George confirmed he was opening the file, the one with the particular legal architecture we had designed 6 months ago, when I first sensed Celine was planning something. He had called it elegant protective engineering. I had just called it insurance. Either way, by the time I hung up that phone, the first 3 moves were already in motion. George's voice came through the phone with the particular precision he reserved for explaining legal architecture I had designed but never hoped to use. "The lake house notices are drafted, but we should talk about the broader structure, the joint account." I leaned back in my chair. Outside my study window, autumn light was fading over Asheville. "Go ahead." "The joint account you established when Celine was 25. You own the principal. She has signatory power for convenience, but legally every dollar in that account is yours. You structured it that way intentionally." I had. 4 years ago, when Celine asked me to help her organize her finances, I opened an account in my name with her as authorized signatory. She could write checks, transfer funds, manage the money, but the ownership never transferred. At the time, I told myself it was simpler for tax purposes. That was a lie. I had built it as protection. "How fast can we move it?" I asked. "Single authorization. I can have the transfer executed before the banks close today." He paused. "There's $60,000 in that account. If you pull it, Celine will know immediately." "Is that what you want?" I thought about the lake house, the pizza grease, the wine in Helena's crystal. My daughter standing in the doorway saying it was not a big deal. "Yes," I said. George was quiet for 3 seconds. Then, "Walk me through what you're thinking." Strike 1, withdraw the entire balance to my private account. Strike 2, close the car payment sub-account, the one in my name that covers her installments. I heard George writing. "The car account is straightforward. It's your name, your authorization. You can close it today. The dealership will contact her directly for payment." "What about the 60,000? "Transfer the entire amount to an irrevocable trust for Indy. Structure it so Celine cannot access it. Ever." The pen stopped scratching. "Irrevocable," George said. "You understand what that means. Once the trust is sealed, Celine cannot touch it. But neither can you. The money is locked for Indy until she turns 25. You can't change your mind, you can't pull it back." That's the point, George. It was always meant for Indy." "You're sure?" "I'm sure. Legal documents are architecture on paper. If you design the foundation correctly, the structure can withstand forces that would collapse buildings built on assumptions and goodwill. I had learned that lesson watching my first retirement fund evaporate in 2008 because I trusted a broker who invested like a gambler. Helena had been the one who insisted we rebuild with legal protections. Trusts, structures, foundations that could not be dismantled by other people's bad decisions. She had been right then. She would be right now. "I'll draft the trust documents," George said. "Education and living expenses accessible at 18, principal at 25. Standard protective language. It'll be bulletproof." How long?" "Authorization ready in 30 minutes. Bank transfer today. Trust formalization by Monday. The car account I can close right now if you authorize it." I looked out the window. A neighbor was raking leaves. Normal Friday afternoon. Somewhere 2 hours away, my daughter was probably still at the lake house, probably still telling Verna that I was overreacting, that I would calm down. She had no idea what was coming. "Do it out," I said. "All 3, now. I'll call you back when it's done." He hung up. I set the phone on the desk and sat in the silence. The house creaked. The refrigerator hummed in the kitchen. Helena's antique clock ticked on the shelf, the one from her grandmother, the one she had wound every Sunday morning. I poured whiskey into a glass but did not drink it, just held it. The weight felt right. 26 minutes later, George called back. It's done. All three. The $60,000 is in transit to the trust account. I'll have the irrevocable trust documents finalized Monday, but the money is already moved and earmarked. The car account is closed as of 14:43. The dealership will receive notification Tuesday morning. They'll contact Celine directly. And the lake house notices, I'll send those tonight. Certified mail and email. 24-hour vacate order. Verna and Lyle will have them by tomorrow morning. I took a sip of the whiskey. It burned in the exact way I needed it to burn. Thank you, George. Mercer. His voice shifted, became less attorney and more friend. What you're doing, it's the right thing. But it's going to hurt. You know that. I know. So she's going to call you. Probably Sunday, maybe sooner. She's going to be angry. I know. And you're ready for that. I looked at the photograph on my desk. Helena, 26 years old, holding infant Celine. Both of them looking at the camera, both of them smiling. That baby had grown into a woman who gave away her father's house like it was hers to distribute. That woman had a daughter of her own now. Indy, 7 years old, gap-toothed smile. The way she called me Grandpa Mercer like it was one word. I'm ready, I said. We hung up. I sat at the desk as the light faded completely and the room filled with shadows. My phone sat silent in front of me. Celine did not know yet. The bank would not notify her until Tuesday. The car dealership would call Monday when the automated payment failed to process. She had the weekend. 2 more days of thinking her father would let it go, would forgive her, would understand that family made mistakes, and you just moved forward. 2 more days before she learned I had spent 6 months preparing for exactly this moment. Indy was 7 years old, with a gap-toothed smile, and her grandmother's eyes. Whatever happened between her mother and me, she would be taken care of, and that part was already sealed beyond anyone's reach. 3 moves in 1 phone call. I finished the whiskey and thought about what Celine would discover Monday morning when the car dealership called. That was just the beginning. The phone rang at 9:17 on a Friday night, and I knew before I picked it up that the whiskey I had poured 3 hours earlier would stay untouched a while longer. Dad. Celine's voice was tight, not angry yet. What did you do? The car dealership just called. My account is closed. They want full payment in 48 hours, or they're repossessing your accounts. Celine. I kept my voice level. Which accounts of yours were those exactly? Silence. Then, Dad, don't do this. The closing on our house is in 10 days. If something goes wrong with the down payment, get some sleep, I said. We'll talk tomorrow? I hung up. The phone rang again immediately. I let it ring. 4 more times over the next hour. I watched it light up, vibrate, go dark. Saturday morning, I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table. At 8:30, someone knocked on my door. Julian Brennan, 32 and carrying the exhaustion of 3 months' worth of secret unemployment, stood on my porch looking like a man who had not slept. He was alone. Can I come in? He asked. I stepped aside. He walked to the kitchen without being invited, sat at the table in the chair where Celine used to sit when she was young, and still asked me for help with her homework. He looked at his hands. I owe you an apology, Mercer. I knew about the plan to go to the lake house. I should have told you. I poured coffee into 2 mugs, set one in front of him, said nothing. I need to tell you something else, he said. Something Celine doesn't know. I sat down across from him, waited. He wrapped both hands around the mug like he was cold. I lost my job 3 months ago. Sales manager position. They downsized, eliminated my role. Severance ran out 6 weeks ago. I took a sip of coffee, still said nothing. Ma, Celine doesn't know. I've been telling her I'm going to work. I sit in the library. I apply for jobs. I come home at the normal time. She thinks everything is fine. I had spent 30 years reading structural integrity in buildings. You learn to spot the difference between a beam under load it could carry and one about to fail. And Julian Brennan sitting at my kitchen table looked like a man who had been carrying too much weight for too long. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. He looked up, met my eyes. "Because I know she's been pulling money from your accounts to cover for me. I didn't know how much until yesterday when she panicked about the car payment. I put it together, the joint account, the car installment account. She's been using them like they were hers. They weren't. I know that now." He took a breath. I was ashamed. About the job. About not being able to provide. About letting her parents think I was still employed while we planned to buy a house we can't afford. "Can't afford," I repeated. The down payment was supposed to come from money Celine said you were giving us. But I'm guessing that money wasn't actually a gift." "It wasn't." Julian nodded. "The house closing is in 10 days. We'll lose the deposit, $5,000. "You'll lose more than that," I said. "The car payment is due in 48 hours. The joint account balance is 0. The lake house has a trespass notice being delivered this morning. If Verna and Lyle don't vacate by tomorrow, George will file criminal charges." He absorbed this like a man who had been expecting bad news. "What do you want me to do?" "Why would I want you to do anything? Because I came here instead of helping Celine figure out how to blame you or find another angle. I came here because..." His voice dropped. "Because you have a 7-year-old granddaughter who doesn't deserve to grow up watching her parents lie to everyone, including each other. Indy, 7 years old with her grandmother's eyes. The trust I had sealed yesterday held her future safe from whatever collapse was coming. But Julian didn't know that. He just knew his daughter deserved better than parents who built their life on borrowed money and borrowed time. And for the first time since opening that lake house door, someone in this family besides me was willing to say it out loud. I refilled his coffee. "Tell me everything Celine has said about the lake house, about the accounts, about what she thinks I'll do." Julian talked for 40 minutes. I listened, took notes. He told me about Verna's suggestion to use the lake house, about Celine's certainty that I wouldn't care about the house they were buying based on money Celine claimed I had promised, but Julian had never heard me promise. He told me about the joint account, how Celine had been transferring funds to cover their mortgage application inspections deposit. How she had laughed when he worried, said her father was rich and wouldn't even notice. He told me everything. When he finished, he looked exhausted and relieved. "What happens now?" he asked. I looked at him for a long moment. "Some alliances you plan for months. Others walk through your door on a Saturday morning when you least expect them. Now you go home. You don't tell Celine you came here. You act like nothing has changed. And when things start to fall apart, and they will, you remember that Indy needs at least one parent who tells the truth." He nodded, stood, walked to the door. "Julian," I said. He turned. "Thank you for coming." He left. I sat at the kitchen table and thought about what he had given me. Not just information, confirmation. Celine had been planning this for months. The lake house was never spontaneous. It was part of a larger pattern. And now I had an inside witness. After Julian left, I spent Saturday afternoon making phone calls that would turn a house into an unlivable shell by Monday morning. The electric company first. I need to discontinue service at 847 Lakeshore Drive, Lake Lure. Effective when Monday, October 21st. Main or To confirm, you want all electrical service discontinued effective Monday morning. Correct. Water company, gas company, internet provider. Each call took 8 minutes. Each representative asked if I was sure. Each time I said I was sure. By 4 o'clock, the lake house would be dark and dry and cold come Monday dawn. I opened my laptop and logged into the security camera system. The cameras recorded continuously stored footage for 30 days. I scrolled back to Friday night, started at 8 p.m., watched at double speed. Verna and Lyle on the sofa. Paxton and Ophelia in the kitchen. Normal trespassing. Expected violations. Then, at 11:03 p.m., Paxton and Ophelia entered the study. He looked around, pointed at something on the wall. The camera angle caught it clearly, Helena's painting. The commemorative watercolor she had given me on our first wedding anniversary. The coast where I'd proposed. 26 years it had hung in my study. I watched Paxton lift it off the wall, watched Ophelia hold the door, watched them carry it through the house and out to their car. 11 to 14 p.m., they loaded it into the trunk. I saved the clip, sent it to my phone, called George. "I need you to pull the insurance registration for the commemorative painting," I said. The watercolor. Helena's anniversary gift. The coastal scene. George knew the inventory. He'd helped me catalog everything after Helena died. "You think something happened to it?" Paxton Brennan took it off the wall Friday night at 11 p.m. "I have footage." Silence. Then, "That's not trespassing anymore, Mercer. That's theft. Every piece in your collection has a serial number registered in your name. If he's taken it anywhere, pawn shop, consignment, online marketplace, we can track it." "Good," I said. I hung up. Sat at my desk. That painting, Helena had given it to me wrapped in brown paper, laughing because she said architects didn't appreciate art, but she was going to teach me. 26 years. And Paxton Brennan had decided it was his to take at 11 o'clock on a Friday night. Sunday afternoon, someone knocked on my door. Celine stood on my porch, looking different from Friday. No panic, no aggression. She wore the expression she used to wear in high school when she'd done something wrong and needed to explain it before I found out from someone else. "Can we talk?" she asked. I let her in. She sat on the sofa. I stayed by the window where the African violets sat on the sill in their ceramic pots. Helena had kept them there. I watered them on Sundays the way she had. Hatton. Celine said, "Julian's parents are in real trouble. His father lost everything. They just need somewhere to stay temporarily. A few weeks until they figure things out." I poured water into the first pot. The soil was dry. "How long have Lyle and Verna Brennan been living beyond their means, Celine?" She blinked. "That's not Dad, their family. They're in crisis." "That wasn't my question." "I don't know. A while. But that doesn't mean we abandoned them." I moved to the second violet. "And the house closing. 10 days, you said." 9 now." Her voice was tighter. "If the down payment isn't there, where was that money supposed to come from?" She was quiet. "Celine, where was the down payment supposed to come from?" The joint account," she said finally. "You set it up for me. You thought it was yours. You gave me signatory power. You said it was for emergencies. A house purchase isn't an emergency." I finished watering the second violet, moved to the third. "It's a planned expenditure requiring planned savings. The account was for unexpected medical bills, car repairs, genuine crises. Not down payments on houses you can't afford." I had spent 3 decades teaching young architects that a structure's integrity isn't found in its ability to bend. It's found in knowing exactly where the load-bearing walls are and refusing to compromise them no matter how much pressure the building faces. "Dad, please." She stood up. "I know I should have asked. I know I made mistakes. But Julian's parents need help and we need that house, and I need you to understand." I set down the watering can. turned to face her fully. "You have 9 days to find another solution," I said. "My house and my money are not that solution." She stared at me. "Dad, this isn't like you. You've always been reasonable. We can work something out." "No." One word, flat, final. She searched my face. I could see her looking for something familiar. The father who would eventually soften. The one who valued peace over principle, who would find middle ground, who would compromise to keep the family intact. That man had existed. He had left the hospital at 2 in the morning 3 years ago and driven home alone to a house that still smelled like her, and in the weeks that followed, he had made a decision so quiet he hadn't even recognized it as a decision. What remained was someone who knew exactly where his walls were and had no intention of moving them. Monday morning, I made scrambled eggs the way Helena used to make them, with chives from the windowsill and a patience that comes from knowing exactly what's about to happen. The kitchen smelled like butter and coffee. The newspaper sat folded beside my plate. Outside the window, my neighbor's magnolia was beginning to bloom early this year because of the warm October we'd been having. The eggs were perfect, soft, not runny. Helena had taught me that. Low heat, constant attention, no rushing. I had calculated that the utility company notifications would reach the lake house between 8 and 9 a.m. Automated messages first, then the physical reality of no electricity, no water, no gas. I had calculated that Lyle Brennan would call me within an hour of discovering it. The phone rang at 8:47. I took a sip of coffee first, let it ring twice, then answered. "What the hell did you do, Mercer?" Lyle's voice came through, aggressive and panicked in equal measure. "Everything's been cut off since this morning. We have women inside Verna Ophelia, no power, no water." "Mr. Brennan," I said. My voice was level, calm. "You are occupying private property without permission. What kind of man cuts power on a house with women and children inside?" I set down my fork. "What kind of man occupies a house that isn't his without asking the owner?" Celine said. "Celine doesn't own the property. I do. The utilities are in my name. I have canceled them. You can't just—" He was sputtering now, the aggression breaking into something closer to desperation. "This is illegal. You can't evict people without notice." "I'm not evicting you, Mr. Brennan. I'm simply declining to pay for utilities at a property you're using without a lease, without permission, and without legal standing. You're welcome to arrange your own service. Of course, the utility companies will need proof you have authority to establish accounts at that address." Silence. "You have until Sunday evening to vacate the property," I said. "In architecture school, they teach you that pressure reveals structural integrity. A well-designed building doesn't collapse under load. It simply demonstrates which walls were meant to carry weight and which were decorative." Lyle Brennan's voice had carried plenty of weight when he thought he was dealing with a pushover. Now it was starting to crack. "I'm calling the police," he said. "This is illegal eviction harassment." "Please do," I said. I kept my voice even, helpful almost. "They'll need to see the deed which has my name on it. They'll want to know if you have a lease agreement. You'll need to explain how you gained access to the property. I have security footage from the past 72 hours that might be helpful for their investigation." Another silence, this one longer. "Security footage," he repeated. "Yes. High definition, time-stamped, continuous recording. It documents entry, occupation, and," I paused, "other activities. Would you like me to forward copies to the local sheriff's department, or would you prefer to show them yourself when you file your complaint?" I heard him breathing, heard something in the background, Verna's voice sharp and questioning. Lyle covered the phone, but I could still hear muffled argument. He came back on the line. We were invited guests. Solane gave us permission. Celine doesn't have authority to grant permission. She doesn't own the property. She doesn't live at the property. She has no legal standing to invite guests to my house. I took another sip of coffee. It was still hot. The property deed is in my name. The utilities were in my name. The insurance is in my name. When the police arrive, and I encourage you to call them, they're going to ask you for documentation. A lease, an invitation letter, a rental agreement. Anything showing you have permission to be there. Solane doesn't own the house, Mr. Brennan. Can't give permission she doesn't have. Can't create legal rights that don't exist. 3 seconds of silence on a phone line can tell you everything you need to know about whether a man is holding cards or bluffing with an empty hand. Lyle was bluffing. We're consulting with an attorney, he said finally. His voice had lost the aggression. Now it was just tired, defensive. About our rights as invited. I hung up, set the phone face down on the table, picked up my fork. The eggs were slightly cold now, but still good. The chives still fresh. Helena had planted them in this windowsill box 14 years ago, kept them trimmed and healthy through every season. I'd learned to keep them alive after she died. Small things. Manageable things. Outside, the magnolia was definitely blooming early. The first white petals were opening at the tips of the branches. Helena had loved magnolias, said they were proof that beautiful things could be tough blooming before the last frost surviving when more delicate flowers would have died. I thought about what Lyle Brennan would say to the police when they arrived. Imagined the conversation. What's your relationship to the property owner? My son is married to his daughter. Do you have a lease? No, but we were invited. By the owner. No, by his daughter. Does she own the property? No, but... Do you have written permission from the property owner to occupy the residence? No, but then you're trespassing, sir. I finished my black coffee in the silence of the kitchen, staring at the screen that remained blissfully dark. Order wasn't just aesthetic. It was structural. Lyle finally understood that his loud threats carried no weight against a foundation made of concrete and deed laws. I washed my mug and left it to dry, reclaiming the quiet flow of my morning. I stood at the window for a moment, looking at the magnolia, thinking about Lyle Brennan sitting in my lake house with no power, no water, no gas. Thinking about him trying to explain to his wife why the man she'd dismissed as dramatic had just demonstrated exactly how undramatic real consequences looked. Thinking about him, realizing that threats only worked on people who were afraid. I smiled for the first time in 2 days. George called back at 2:13 that afternoon with the kind of information that turns property disputes into criminal cases. The serial number matched, he said. Paxton Brennan walked into Henderson Pawn on Route 9 Saturday morning with your wife's anniversary painting. I was standing at my office window looking out at nothing in particular. You're certain. Serial number, description, date of transaction, all confirmed. The pawn shop keeps digital records now. Photographed the piece, scanned his ID. He got $450 for a painting worth $8,000. That painting. Helena had given it to me on our first anniversary, a watercolor of the coast where I had proposed. 26 years it had hung in my study. She had said art was the soul of a house, insisted we register every piece properly, document every serial number for insurance purposes. She had been protecting us even then. If he pawned it, George continued, we have potential criminal exposure, receiving stolen property, conversion of insured artwork. This is not just civil trespass anymore, Mercer. This is felony territory. Good, I said. Good. Yes, document everything. I want photographs of the pawn ticket, the transaction record, his identification, everything. What are you planning? I'm planning to let Paxton Brennan keep digging until he realizes he's standing in a hole he can't climb out of. I hung up and called my son Hayes. 33 years old architect like me, but he had spent the past 6 years building a security consulting firm on the side. I had helped him capitalize it when he was 27. Now he had contacts in every county within 100 miles. "You Hazen," I said when he answered. "I need you to confirm a location for me." "What kind of location?" "Pawn shop. Henderson Pawn Route 9, about 15 miles north of the lake. There's a painting there that belongs to me. I need visual confirmation within the hour." He didn't ask why, didn't ask how I knew, just said, "I'll call you back." 47 minutes later, my phone rang. "Found it," Hayes said. "Henderson Pawn Route 9, 15 miles north of the lake. Confirmed via description and transaction date. It's sitting in their secured inventory section. Climate controlled. They know it's valuable even if they underpaid for it." "Do not touch it yet," I said. What? Let it sit there. We'll retrieve it at the right moment." There was a pause. Then, "You want it as evidence, not recovered property?" "Yes." "Smart. I'll document everything: photos, receipt, trail, timestamps. When you're ready to move, we'll have a complete chain of custody." "Thank you, Hayes." "Dad," he said, and his voice shifted to something less professional. "What's happening? Celine called me last week asking about property law. I didn't put it together until now." "I'll explain later," I said. "Right now, I just need you to keep that painting exactly where it is." We hung up. I sat at my desk and thought about Paxton Brennan walking into a pawn shop with Helena's painting. Thought about him signing his name, showing his identification, creating a paper trail that connected him directly to property that didn't belong to him. The thought about how criminals always think they're smarter than they are. At 6:15 that evening, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. Then I heard the voice. "Grandpa Mercer, my granddaughter Indy, 7 years old, with a gap-toothed smile, and her grandmother Helena's eyes called me from her mother's phone with a worried voice that broke something in my carefully maintained calm. "Indy," I said. My voice softened for the first time in 3 days. "Hi, sweetheart. Are you okay? Mommy has been crying. She says you are mad at her. Are you mad at us?" "I am not mad at you, sweetheart, not one bit." "But you are mad at Mommy." I closed my eyes. "Mommy and I are working through some grown-up things. But you're perfect. You know that, right?" Mommy showed me pictures of the lake house," she said. Her voice brightened. "It's so pretty. She showed me my bedroom on her phone. The big one with the window to the water. She says it's going to be mine someday." "Is that true?" I went very still. "No, she showed you your bedroom." "Yes, the one with the big window. She says when I'm bigger, I'll have my own room there and we can visit all the time, and I can paint pictures of the lake like Grandma Helena did." 7 years old. Celine had shown her a photo of a bedroom in my house, and told her it would be hers someday, as if I were already dead, or simply an obstacle to be managed. "That sounds nice, sweetheart," I said. My voice was steady, calm. "We'll talk about it when you're bigger, okay?" "Okay. I love you, Grandpa Mercer." "I love you too, Indy, so much." She hung up. I sat very still for a long time. Then I went to my desk and opened the notebook where I had been documenting everything. The timeline, the evidence, the legal strategy. I added 3 items to the list. 1. Formal trust documentation to be delivered to Celine, proof that Indy's future is protected, but not at Celine's discretion. 2. Written statement of property ownership and inheritance intentions, no room for assumptions or manipulation. 3. Conversation with Indy when she's older, explaining boundaries, ownership, and why love doesn't mean giving people everything they want. Whatever happened between Celine and me, Indy would be protected. That part was already sealed in the trust George had created. But now I understood the stakes were not just about property or principles. They were about making certain my granddaughter did not grow up learning that manipulation and entitlement were how family worked. That showing a 7-year-old a bedroom in someone else's house and calling it hers was acceptable behavior. That you could take what you wanted if you just believed hard enough that you deserved it. I closed the notebook. Outside evening was settling over Asheville. The neighbor's magnolia had fully bloomed now, white petals bright against the darkening sky. Helena would have known what to say to Indy. She would have found the words to explain love and boundaries in a way a 7-year-old could understand. I only knew how to build walls high enough and strong enough that when Indy was old enough to understand, she would see them clearly and know why they existed. That evening, I opened my surveillance camera email and began watching 3 days of footage that would transform family disagreement into documented criminal trespass. The office was dark except for the computer screen. I had made tea an hour earlier and forgotten to drink it. Now it sat cold beside the keyboard while I watched strangers move through Helena's house like it belonged to them. Friday evening, 8:30 p.m. Lyle slammed his hand on the design desk Helena had spent 15 years refinishing grain by grain. The camera caught the impact, caught the glasses rattling on the surface. Saturday morning, 9:15 a.m. Verna opened the blueprint drawer like she was shopping for wallpaper samples, not handling documents worth more than her car. She pulled out the original lake house plans, the ones I had drawn by hand in 2004, and flipped through each page while drinking coffee over them. Saturday afternoon, 2:40 p.m. Paxton and Ophelia in the study laughing about something. Then, at 11:03 p.m. the same night, both of them lifting the painting off the wall, carrying it through the house, loading it into their trunk. Every violation time-stamped, every face visible, every movement preserved in high definition. An architect learns to read a building's history. In the marks people leave scuff on the wall-worn threshold, the ghost of furniture that sat in one place too long. And these 3 days of footage were a history of entitlement written in real time. I scrolled forward to Friday evening. 7:20 p.m. Lyle and Verna in the living room. The audio was clear. Once Celine gets the deed transferred, we can renovate this entire east wing, Lyle said. He was gesturing at the windows. New kitchen. Master bath expansion. Open up these walls. Verna looked uncertain. Are you certain she can do that? She says her father will not fight it, Lyle said. He never does. I watched the clip 3 times. Exported it. Saved it to the folder labeled simply with the date Helena had died. Drafted an email to Celine with the video attached. Did not send it. Not yet. Timing mattered. Evidence delivered at the wrong moment was just noise. Evidence delivered at the right moment was a legal weapon. I closed the laptop at 11:30 p.m. and sat in the dark for a while. Outside the street was quiet. The neighbor's porch light was still on. Everything looked normal. Everything was normal except for the fact that my daughter's in-laws were living in my house, planning to renovate it, after my daughter transferred them a deed she could not transfer because she did not own the property. I went to bed, slept 6 hours, woke at 6 a.m. and made coffee. The phone rang at 8. Dad, my son Raymond, 30, and working as an accountant at a firm Celine had always dismissed as barely successful, called me that Tuesday morning. With information that confirmed what I had suspected for months, someone had been protecting me in silence. Raymond, I said. Good morning. Hayes called me yesterday about the painting. Dad, I need to tell you something. I waited. The lake house deed is secure, he said. I ran the title search last night. There is nothing they can challenge. The property is completely clean. No liens, no claims, no possible legal complications. How did you... I have been keeping an eye on Celine's financial activity through property management channels for 6 months. His voice was steady, professional. Ever since she started asking me unusual questions about deed transfers and property inheritance, I did not say anything because I was not sure. But when Hayes called yesterday, I knew it was time. I sat down at the kitchen table. The coffee was hot. The morning light was coming through the window at the angle Helena had loved. "What did you find?" I asked. She has been researching adverse possession law, squatters' rights, transferring property to family members. She consulted with 2 different attorneys in the past 3 months. I have a contact at one of the firms who flagged her inquiries. Both times she was asking about transferring lake house ownership. And you ran a title search. Last night, the property is ironclad, Dad. No matter what she tries, there is no legal path for her to claim it. And if she tries anyway, we have documentation of her intent going back months. Raymond had been there all along, not forgotten or neglected, but quietly watching the same thing I was watching, building protections I did not even know existed until the moment I needed them most. "Thank you, Raymond," I said. My voice was quieter than I intended. "Celine spent years telling everyone I was the forgotten son," he said. There was no bitterness in his voice, just fact. "She told people you did not understand my work, that you never called. She had no idea what I was actually doing. What were you doing?" "Watching, learning, building walls around everything she thought she could take." He paused. "You taught me that. You never said it directly. But I watched you design buildings for 30 years. I learned that structural integrity is not about being the loudest voice in the room. It is about knowing exactly where the weight is and making sure the foundation can hold it." I looked out the window. The magnolia was in full bloom now, white petals everywhere. "Your mother would be proud of you," I said. "I know," he said. "That's why I did it." We hung up. I sat at the table with my coffee and thought about Celine's narrative. The forgotten son, the father who did not understand, the family that needed healing, all of it built on the assumption that Raymond was too busy, too distant, too focused on his own life to notice what she was planning. She had no idea that while she was making that argument, Raymond had been quietly building barriers around everything she planned to take. My elder son had not needed my instruction to understand structural integrity. He had learned it by watching me design buildings for 30 years. And now he had designed something of his own protection she could not breach. I finished my coffee, made breakfast, read the newspaper. Wednesday would bring Lyle's next move. I could feel it coming, the way you feel a storm building, the pressure change, the shift in the air. But now I knew something Lyle did not know. I was not alone. The email arrived Wednesday at 10:47 with a subject line that read, "Legal consultation re-property dispute," as if capital letters could manufacture legitimacy where none existed. I was drinking coffee when my phone chimed. Opened it. Read Lyle Brennan's email once. Then forwarded it to George with a single line. This is what desperation looks like when it tries to speak legalese. The email claimed he was consulting with a real estate attorney regarding rights as invited guests who had established occupancy. Mentioned potential adverse possession statutes. Cited vague tenant protection laws. The tone was aggressive, designed to intimidate with terminology he probably learned from a 15-minute internet search. George called back within 3 minutes. "Oh, Mercer." "This is a bluff," he said. I could hear him smiling. "Invited guest has no legal standing against a property owner with a deed. Adverse possession requires years of continuous occupation, not days. And he would need to prove hostile possession, openly claiming ownership against your rights. He has none of that." "I know," I said, "but I want him to see it in writing from an attorney, on letterhead, with citations. I'll draft a response this afternoon. Make it surgical, always." Legal threats are like architectural drawings, only worth the foundation they sit on, and Lyle Brennan was trying to build a skyscraper on sand with a crayon sketch. George sent me the draft at 2:30. I read it twice. It was perfect. Official law firm letterhead. Specific state property code citations. A paragraph explaining that invited guest status, if it existed, which it did not, terminated the moment the property owner revoked permission. Another paragraph noting that adverse possession in North Carolina requires 20 years of continuous hostile open occupation, a timeline that would make their claim impossible by any legal standard. A third paragraph, observing that security footage documented unauthorized entry and continued occupation after verbal notice to vacate. Then the surgical cut. Furthermore, George had written, "Our client notes that law enforcement contact was suggested by your party during the telephone conversation of October 21st. We welcome that contact and will provide full documentation, including property deed, security camera footage, and correspondence. We request that you provide documentation of any claimed rights or permissions by close of business Friday, October 25th. I called him. The part about providing documentation, it will expose he has none, George said. It's a legal checkmate disguised as a question. He cannot provide what does not exist, and the request itself forces him to either admit he has no standing or commit to a lie in writing that becomes evidence. Send it. Certified email with red receipt. Yes. George sent it at 3:15. The read receipt came back at 4:32. No response followed. That silence was my answer. Thursday morning, I was making breakfast when Hayes sent an email with video attachment and a subject line. Your surveillance caught something. I opened it on my laptop at the kitchen table. The footage was from Wednesday afternoon. Verna Brennan moving through the lake house study and living room, photographing every piece. Not casual photos, systematic catalog. The 19th century architectural drawings Helena had bought at an estate sale in Raleigh. The Tiffany lamps from an auction in Charleston. The antique walnut chairs she had refinished by hand in our garage over 3 weekends. Verna held up her phone to each item, moved to the next, photographed it from multiple angles. Then I saw her make a phone call holding the phone camera up to one of the lamps while she talked. Remote appraisal. She was getting someone to evaluate them. Helena had spent 15 years collecting those pieces, not for their value, though some were worth thousands, but because she said old things carried memory in their grain, in their glaze, in the patina of being handled by careful hands. And Verna Brennan was photographing them with the eyes of someone calculating replacement cost. I called George. Would we have a problem? I said. What kind? Verna is photographing every antique in the house, systematically, making phone calls while doing it. I think she's getting remote appraisals. For a civil claim or to sell them, George said immediately. Either way, we need complete inventory documented. Do you have the insurance list? Yes. Everything is registered and photographed. Helena insisted on it. Send it to me. I'm adding a paragraph to the eviction notice requesting written confirmation that no items have been moved, sold, or damaged beyond the already documented painting. If anything else is missing when they vacate, we have grounds for criminal conversion charges in addition to theft. I sent him the inventory. 43 items. Each one with insurance registration number, photograph, appraised value, and purchase documentation. George called back an hour later. The revised notice is ready. It lists every registered item by name and serial number. Requests written confirmation of their location and condition, and notes that any discrepancies will be reported to law enforcement as criminal conversion of property. Send it, I said. Already done. They'll have it by end of business today. I sat at my desk and watched the footage again. Verna's face was calm, focused. She moved through the house like someone taking inventory before an estate sale. I had thought she was simply entitled and shameless. A woman who saw an empty house and decided her family deserved to use it. A freeloader with delusions of family privilege. I was wrong. She was strategic, calculating. Far more dangerous than someone who just wanted free rent. She was someone who walked into a house that did not belong to her and saw assets, saw value, saw things that could be claimed or converted or liquidated. The painting was not opportunistic theft by a 24-year-old who needed cash. It was part of a pattern, a test run. If Paxton could walk out with one piece and pawn it without consequence, what else could walk out that door? I called Hayes. I need you to add the antiques to your documentation, I said. Time-stamped photos of everything in place. Today, if possible. You think she's going to take more than the painting, he said. I think she's deciding which pieces are worth the risk. I'll be there in 2 hours. I'll photograph everything against the surveillance stills. Create a before and after record. Thank you. I hung up and looked out the window. Friday tomorrow. Then Saturday. Then Sunday. Sunday was the deadline. The moment when all this careful documentation would convert from evidence gathering to action. But first Friday. Friday I would send Celine the surveillance footage, show her what her in-laws were really planning, divide the enemy from within. Sometimes the best way to tear down a structure is to remove a single load-bearing wall and let the building collapse itself. Friday morning, I composed an email to my daughter with 2 video files attached and a subject line that read simply, "What your in-laws actually think of you." The email body contained one line I thought you should know what they are planning with your inheritance. The footage is dated and time-stamped. I hit send at 9:03 a.m., made coffee, waited. Celine called back at 9:22. Her voice was shaking. "Where did you get this? You were recording us the entire time." Your in-laws have been kind enough to document themselves, I said. The question is whether you knew about adverse possession or if they plan to cut you out too. Silence. Then, I didn't know they were talking about that. Dad, they said you were being unreasonable, and you believed them. Oh, no, I thought they just needed somewhere to stay. They needed somewhere to stay long enough to claim ownership through adverse possession. Lyle was planning renovations. Verna was cataloging your mother's collection for appraisal. They were building a legal claim to property worth $750,000. Another silence. Longer this time. "What do you want me to do?" she asked finally. "Nothing," I said. "Sunday is the deadline. They leave or I remove them." I hung up. Sunday evening at 8 p.m. I drove to the lake house with Hayes and 2 security specialists from his firm. The lights were blazing inside. Music playing. The Brennans still thought this was negotiation theater. Lyle opened the door red-faced from wine. He saw me, saw Hayes, saw the 2 men in dark shirts with equipment cases. "Mercer, we are not leaving. You cannot just—" "Mr. Brennan," I said. "It is Sunday 8 p.m. I gave you a week." Hayes stepped forward. "We're replacing the locks. You can exit voluntarily, or we can call law enforcement to facilitate. There is a particular satisfaction in watching a structure behave exactly as you designed it. To the same satisfaction I felt watching Hayes and his team execute a plan we had discussed 6 months ago when I first suspected I might need to remove people from a building I owned. I'm calling the police right now." Hayes handed him a folder. "They'll need to see this. Property deed, surveillance footage, legal correspondence, everything dated and notarized." Lyle opened the folder. I watched his face change as he read. From inside, Verna's voice, "Lyle, what's happening?" Hayes gestured to his team. "Front door first, then back entrance. Full biometric replacement on all access points." Power drills filled the air. One specialist was already removing the existing lock from the front door. The other headed toward the back entrance. Verna appeared in the doorway. "You can't just change the locks while we're inside, ma'am." Hayes said, "You have 30 minutes to gather your belongings and exit the property." Paxton and Ophelia emerged from the study, started throwing things into bags. My phone rang. "Solene." I didn't answer. It rang again. This time Lyle's phone rang. She was calling him. He answered on speaker. "Solene, your father is here with—" "Dad, please, can we just—" "30 minutes, Solene," I said, hung up. I stood outside while Hayes supervised the installation. The new system was biometric fingerprint scanner backup keypad connected to my phone. Nothing they could pick or bypass. 30 minutes later, 5 people stood on the gravel driveway with their luggage. The lake behind them was dark and still. I understood finally what Helena had meant when she said a house that is not protected is just an expensive way to store regret. Hayes handed me the new key fob. "Synced to your phone. You can monitor all access remotely." I tested the front door, pressed my thumb to the scanner. It clicked open, closed it, locked. Lyle and Verna were loading their car. Paxton and Ophelia had already pulled away, taillights disappearing down the mountain road. Verna turned to look at me one last time. Her face was hard, angry, defeated. "You'll regret this," she said. "No," and I said, "I won't." They got in their car. Engine started. Gravel crunched under tires. I stood with Hayes in the driveway and watched them leave. Watched the red taillights fade around the curve. Listened to the sound of their engine grow distant and finally disappear. The lake was quiet, the way Helena had always liked it. The way I had designed every window and door to preserve not just the view, but the silence. Hayes looked at me. "You all right?" "Yes." "What happens now?" "Now I go home. Tomorrow Olivia comes with the management contract. We find tenants who will care for this place." He nodded. "And Solene has 9 days until her house closing collapses. She'll call when she's ready to face what comes next." We walked back to our cars. I took one last look at the lake house lights off, now porch dark, the building settling back into itself. I got in my car and drove home. Through my rearview mirror, I watched the lake house disappear behind trees. By the time I reached Asheville, it was past 10. I pulled into my driveway, sat in the dark for a moment. Thought about Celine standing somewhere tonight, realizing her house closing was going to fail. Her car payment was overdue. Her in-laws had used her. Her father had spent 2 weeks building walls she couldn't breach. Thought about Indy, 7 years old, with a trust fund she couldn't touch until she was 25, and a grandfather who had made certain no one else could touch it either. I went inside, made tea. Sat in my study where Helena's violets still bloomed on the windowsill. The house was quiet. The night was quiet. And for the first time in 2 weeks, I felt something close to peace. Monday morning, I drove back to the lake house for the first time since watching 5 people leave with their luggage, and found it cleaned, ordered, and mine again. Olivia met me at the door. A professional cleaning crew had worked through Sunday night. The floors gleamed. The windows were spotless. Every surface where Verna and Lyle had left their marks had been restored. "The couple from Atlanta," Olivia said as we walked through the house. "They teach high school and do nature photography. They asked specifically if they could maintain the iris garden by the water." I stopped walking. "Helena's garden?" "Yes." They saw photos in the listing. The wife said the irises reminded her of something her grandmother used to grow, and they wanted permission to care for them properly. We stood in the study where Helena had spent mornings reading by the window I had angled for her, where Paxton had lifted her painting off the wall at 11 p.m. on a Friday night, where Verna had photographed every antique like she was cataloging inventory. Now it was clean, empty, waiting for people who would respect what they had been given. Olivia looked around the room. Whoever designed this space understood light. Every room feels like it was meant for the time of day you would use it most. The architect did, I said. She smiled slightly. Understanding passed between us without words. We signed the 12-month property management contract at the kitchen table. Olivia would handle everything: tenant screening, maintenance calls, lease renewals. I would receive monthly reports and annual financials. The lake house would be lived in, cared for, honored. I had built that house to be lived in, not to be a museum to grief. Helena would have agreed. She always said a house that was not used was just an expensive way to store regret. They move in next weekend, Olivia said. I'll send you photos once they're settled. The wife wants to plant additional irises in the spring. Purple ones to match what's already there. Yet Helena's favorite color, I said. I thought it might be. I drove home feeling lighter than I had in weeks. The lake house was no longer a memorial or a battlefield. It was becoming what it had always been meant to be: a place where people lived, and morning light came through windows at exactly the right angle. Tuesday afternoon, I was at my desk when my phone rang. Hayes, the repo happened, he said. Thought you'd want to know. And, clean, professional. She tried to argue, but the driver had all the documentation. It's done. I thanked him and hung up. Sat very still for a moment, then went back to the architectural drawings I had been reviewing for a client. I drove back to my townhome feeling lighter than I had in weeks. The lake house was no longer a memorial or a battlefield. Its structural purpose had been restored. I stood in my quiet study, organizing my layout tools on the desk, waiting for the clock to hit 2:30. I knew exactly where my boundaries were, and I knew that across town, the first heavy hammer of consequence was about to drop. Before I tell you what happened in that parking lot on Tuesday afternoon, if you're still with me right now, comment A or B: will this break Celine or wake her up? Add your reason in 5 to 10 words, so I can see your read. Quick note: what follows contains fictionalized details added for emotional depth and storytelling impact. Neighbors were on their balconies, some getting mail, others just outside on a warm October afternoon. The driver was professional, checked his paperwork, approached the vehicle, began the process of loading it onto the flatbed. Celine came out of her building, saw what was happening, rushed toward him. Wait. Stop. I made payments. This is a mistake. You need to check your records. The driver kept working. Account shows closed October 18th, ma'am. No activity since. We sent 3 notices to this address. I didn't receive any notices. This has to be wrong. He didn't argue. Just secured the car, checked the chains, made sure everything was properly fastened. Celine stood there in the empty parking space where her car had been for 3 years. Her face was red, her hands were shaking, and on every balcony, in every window, neighbors were watching. One woman on the 2nd floor turned to say something to someone inside. A man on the 3rd floor pulled out his phone. Not to call anyone, just to look at it, to have something to do while he watched. The truck pulled away. Celine stood alone in the empty space. From the 4th floor window, Julian watched the entire thing. He had spent 3 months hiding unemployment from his wife. 3 months watching her pull money from her father's accounts to cover what he could not provide. 3 months living in an apartment they could afford only because someone else was paying for the car, the utilities, the groceries. Everything she had was borrowed. The car. The down payment for the house they would never buy. The confidence that came from never having to build something herself. Watching it get repossessed should have felt like his failure too. But instead, it felt like the first honest thing that had happened to them in years. Julian had watched enough buildings in his sales career to know the difference between a structure settling and a structure failing. Celine standing in that empty parking space was not settling. It was the moment before collapse, and instead of panic, he felt something unexpected wash through him. Relief. Like a pressure valve releasing, like he could finally breathe. He had been living in a house built on his father-in-law's money, and his wife's certainty that she deserved it. He had been watching her operate with borrowed confidence, borrowed resources, borrowed time. Watching it all get taken back meant maybe finally they could start over with something real. Celine turned and walked back toward the building. Her shoulders were rigid. Her pace was fast. She did not look up at the windows, even though she had to know people were watching. Julian stepped back from the glass, sat down on the couch, thought about the conversation he had had with her father 2 weeks ago, about indie deserving parents who told the truth, about starting over at 31 with nothing but honesty. He picked up his phone, looked at the job contact Raymond had given him, the one he had put in his wallet instead of his phone, pulled it out now, stared at it, thought about what it would mean to call, to take the interview, to accept that everything they had built together was collapsing, and maybe that was exactly what needed to happen. He heard Celine's key in the lock, heard the door open, heard her come inside. She did not say anything, just went straight to the bedroom and closed the door. Julian sat on the couch holding the business card and felt something he had not felt in months. Clarity. Wednesday morning, George called me into his office to review the civil compensation document that would move this from family disagreement into territory where the law takes over. The document sat on his desk. 5 pages. Firm letterhead. "I've itemized everything," George said. Pizza oil on Helena's desk, shoe damage to the floors, the blueprints. Each violation documented, each cost calculated. I read through the list, then the final item. "Stolen artwork," George said. "Watercolor coastal scene serial number registered with your insurance company, appraised value $8,000. Removed October 18th at 11:14 p.m. Pawned at Henderson Pawn, October 19th. Owner Mercer Ashford. Person who pawned Paxton Brennan with valid identification." I looked up. Tatati? This effectively opens criminal exposure for Paxton Brennan. George continued. "Receiving stolen property. Conversion of insured artwork with documented serial numbers. The moment you reported it stolen, and we can prove he pawned it, this crosses from civil damage to potential felony." What makes it criminal versus civil? The serial number registry. You registered it as insured property. You reported it removed without permission. He pawned it under his own name. That's theft and conversion. Legal documents are load-bearing walls in their own right. Once you put certain words on paper with serial numbers and registered claims, you have built a structure that cannot be dismantled with apologies or family loyalty. "This is the point of no return," George said. "From family disagreement to recorded legal dispute with law enforcement implications." "Are you certain?" I thought about Helena's painting, the one she had given me on our first anniversary. "Send it," I said. George sent certified copies to Lyle Brennan and Paxton Brennan's addresses, electronic and physical. Read receipts on both. Thursday morning, I was making coffee when Raymond called. "Dad, I finally got the official forensic report on that suspicious loan I flagged weeks ago. You need to hear this." I sat down at the kitchen table. "Go ahead." The handwriting analysis came back confirmed. Verna signed the agreement for $23,000, but Celine is listed as the guarantor. Verna got sloppy, and now we have the bulletproof evidence of fraud we were waiting for. Celine took out a loan. Not exactly. Raymond paused. Verna Brennan signed the loan agreement, but Celine is listed as guarantor. Her signature is on file. I went very still. Does Celine know about this loan? Almost certainly not. I pulled a copy of the signature. It doesn't match her usual hand. Verna got sloppy. You're telling me Verna forged Celine's signature? Well, yes. Making your daughter criminally liable for a loan she doesn't know exists. The lender is questionable, almost certainly connected to whoever Lyle owed money to. I looked out the window. The magnolia had lost most of its petals. Your daughter has been used as collateral without her knowledge, Raymond said quietly. That's identity theft, Dad. Criminal fraud. I thanked him, hung up, sat at the table with my cold coffee. My daughter had spent 3 years treating me like an obstacle to her inheritance. And the entire time, the people she thought were her allies had been quietly making her criminally liable for debts she would discover only when collectors came calling. I went to my office, took out the folder labeled with Helena's death date, the same folder that held surveillance footage of Lyle planning renovations, the same folder that held documentation of Paxton stealing the painting, added Raymond's notes, the loan amount, the lender information, the forged signature analysis. Did not call Celine, did not send her the documents, did not act. The time to use this evidence had not arrived. I sat at my desk as afternoon light faded. Thought about Verna Brennan standing in my lake house saying Celine would inherit everything. Thought about her photographing Helena's antiques. Thought about her forging her daughter-in-law's signature to secure a personal loan. The woman who had acted entitled to my property had been simultaneously binding my daughter to debt Celine did not know existed. I felt something that was not quite pity but close. Celine had made her choices. She had given her in-laws keys to my house. She had pulled money from accounts that were not hers. She had shown indie photos of a bedroom and called it hers someday. But she had also been used, exploited, made criminally liable by people who smiled while forging her signature. The folder sat on my desk. Complete now. Documentation of everything since October 18th. Eviction, car repossession, stolen painting, forged loan guarantee. When the time came, Celine would need to see this, not from me explaining it, but from the documents themselves, the signatures, the dates, the evidence. She would need to understand that while she had been planning to take my house, her in-laws had been planning to take her financial future. I closed the folder, put it back in the drawer. Outside evening was settling over Asheville. The streetlights came on. I made dinner, sat at the table where Helena and I had eaten thousands of meals together. Indy would visit. That part was certain. The trust I had sealed guaranteed her future regardless of what happened between her mother and me. But Celine would have to face what came next on her own. The house closing would fail in a week. The forged loan would surface eventually. The car was already gone. And when she was ready, when everything had collapsed enough that she could finally see clearly, I would show her the folder. Not to punish her, not to prove I was right, to show her exactly who had been standing beside her and what they had been doing while she was not looking. I washed my plate, dried it, put it away. Helena's violets still bloomed on the windowsill. I checked their soil, still moist. The house was quiet. The night was quiet. And somewhere across town, my daughter was living in an apartment she could barely afford, waiting for a house closing that would never happen, liable for a loan she did not know existed. The walls I had built were holding, but so were the walls her in-laws had built around her. The difference was that mine were designed to protect. Theirs were designed to trap. Friday morning, Julian Brennan walked into my kitchen carrying an envelope and sat down at the table without saying a word, looking at his hands the way a man looks at evidence of something he cannot take back. I poured coffee, set a cup in front of him, waited. He slid the envelope across the table. "2 screenshots from our financial software," he said. His voice was flat. "Celine started transferring account control 3 months ago, right after I lost my job. Everything we had jointly, she was systematically moving it into her name only." I opened the envelope, printed pages, account transfers, date stamps, a methodical plan executed over 12 weeks. "Why are you showing me this, Julian?" He looked up, met my eyes. "Because Indy deserves better than parents who build their lives on lies and borrowed money. Because I've been part of the problem. And because you're the only person in this family who seems to understand that protection means building walls before you need them, not after everything collapses. I looked at the screenshots, saw my daughter's careful planning, saw the dates, saw the pattern. "What do you want from me?" "Nothing," he said. "I'm not asking for mercy or money. I'm asking if there's a way to protect Indy from what's coming, from her parents' mistakes, from—" He stopped. "From us." Julian Brennan had walked into my house carrying evidence against his own wife. Not asking for forgiveness, but asking in the only way a man with nothing left could ask whether protecting a 7-year-old from her parents' mistakes was worth becoming the person who exposed them. I poured more coffee. The trust I set up for Indy is sealed, irrevocable. She gets education expenses at 18, principal at 25. Neither you nor Celine can touch it. That part is already done. He nodded slowly. "Thank you." But you need to understand something, Julian. What you just gave me, this changes the dynamic. Celine was planning to cut you out financially while using my money to cover your expenses. That's not just betrayal. That's calculation. I know. And you're still here, in the marriage, in the apartment. "For now," he said, "until I can't be anymore." Saturday afternoon, my phone rang. Julian again. "They're here," he said. No greeting, just exhausted statement. "Who's there?" "All of them. Lyle, Verna, Paxton. They ran out of motel money. Showed up this morning with everything they own. 6 people in 2 bedrooms now. Paxton on the couch. Lyle and Verna took Indy's room. She's sleeping with us." I sat down at my desk. "How long can you tolerate it?" "I'm not trying to tolerate it," Julian said. "I'm documenting it. You taught me that." Verna had taken over the kitchen like she paid rent. Lyle was drinking Julian's beer and complaining they didn't have cable. Paxton was treating the living room like his bedroom. And Indy was displaced from her own space, confused and upset, sleeping in her parents' room because her grandparents had nowhere else to go. Sunday evening, Julian texted me, "Celine just got collection call. $23,000. She didn't know about it. Then she's tracing it now. This is going to explode." Then Verna admitted it. Forged signature. Claimed it was for family. Screaming match in living room. I sat at my desk reading the texts as they came through. Watching in real time as the structure I had known was unstable finally began its collapse. Monday morning, Hayes called. "Neighbor complaints at Celine's building," he said. "Disturbances, loud arguments. Building manager is documenting everything. Thought you'd want to know." "How many complaints?" "3 in the past 48 hours. All from units adjacent to Celine's apartment." I thanked him. Hung up. Looked at the folder on my desk. The one with surveillance footage. The one with the forged loan documentation. The one with Julian's financial screenshots. Evidence of a family that had never been properly engineered to begin with. Julian's next text came through Monday evening. "Verna keeps saying Celine was going to inherit everything anyway. Lyle is defending her. Celine is threatening to call police. Indy won't come out of the bedroom." I had seen this pattern before, not in buildings, but in families. The moment when the story people tell about themselves stops matching the facts they live inside. The Brennans had been telling themselves a story about wealth and entitlement for years. Now the facts were catching up, and there was no revision left that could save the narrative. I replied to Julian, "Document everything. Dates, times, what was said. Keep Indy safe." He sent back, "That's all I'm trying to do." Monday night, I sat in my study with the lights off, looking out at the street. The neighbor's porch light was on. The magnolia tree was bare now, all its petals gone. 6 people in a 2-bedroom apartment. 1 forged signature. $23,000 in debt nobody knew existed. And a 7-year-old child sleeping in her parents' room because her grandparents had taken hers. The structure was failing exactly as I had known it would. Not because I had sabotaged it, but because it had been built on borrowed money, borrowed time, and the assumption that quiet old men never fight back. Julian's texts kept coming through the night, each one another crack in the foundation Celine thought was solid. Tuesday, I would meet with George to finalize the new will. The one with age-based transfer clauses. The one with maturity requirements. The one with 5-year boundary violation terms that would transfer control to Raymond if Celine couldn't maintain basic respect for property rights and financial honesty. But tonight I just sat in the dark and watched the reports come through. Watched a family that had tried to take my house discover they couldn't even maintain peace in their own apartment. Watched my daughter realize the people she had trusted were the ones who had been using her all along. Watched Julian Brennan become exactly what I had needed him to become, a witness with nothing left to lose and a daughter worth protecting. The violets on my windowsill were still blooming. Helena had planted them 17 years ago. They had survived every season since. Some structures were built to last, others were built to look good, until the first real pressure test. Across town in a cramped apartment, with too many people and not enough truth, the Brennan family was discovering which kind of structure they had always been. Tuesday morning, I met George at his office to design the legal architecture that would reshape my family's structure, whether Celine understood it yet or not. The conference room table was covered with estate planning documents, trust frameworks, transfer mechanisms, behavioral contingency clauses. "We're building something that's never been tested," George said, spreading the papers out. "Age-based transfers contingent on demonstrated financial responsibility. Boundary violation triggers that shift control to Raymond. Maturity assessment panels. This is family governance as structural engineering." I looked at the documents. Thought about the folder in my desk with surveillance footage forged, signatures, stolen paintings. Thought about Indy sleeping in her parents' room because her grandparents had taken hers. "How enforceable is it?" I asked. "Completely. As long as we document the violations properly. That's what the cameras did. That's what Julian's evidence does. That's what the forged loan does. Every boundary crossed becomes a documented incident that activates the next level of consequence." He picked up a page. "Here's the part that protects you. If you experience a health crisis while boundary violations are ongoing, Raymond assumes control immediately. Emergency activation clause. You don't have to be conscious to protect your assets from being exploited." I hadn't considered that. Hadn't thought about what would happen if I couldn't protect myself. How immediate, a talking in 24 hours. Raymond gets notified, presents this document to your medical team, and financial institutions assumes fiduciary authority over all assets, except the irrevocable trusts. Celine can't touch anything until you're recovered and can reassess. I nodded slowly. At it. We spent 3 hours working through each clause, each contingency, each trigger point. Trust transfers at age milestones, but only if financial responsibility was demonstrated. Raymond would assess. If Celine showed 5 consecutive years of respecting boundaries, maintaining employment, avoiding debt manipulation, the trust could transfer at 35 instead of 40. If she didn't, it transferred at 45. If she violated boundaries during those 5 years, control shifted permanently to Raymond as trustee with discretionary distribution authority. "Incentive for change," George said. "But consequence for continued pattern." Around noon, I noticed George's hands were shaking slightly as he drafted the grandchild protection clauses. The ones that sealed Indy's trust beyond anyone's reach. The ones that established education fund access at 18 principal at 25, managed by independent panel until then. "Are you all right?" I asked. He looked up. "I'm writing a document that might estrange you from your daughter for years, possibly permanently. I'm writing protection that assumes the worst about people you raised. Yes, I'm..." he stopped. This is necessary. I know it's necessary. But it's also heartbreaking. It is, I said. We finished at 2 p.m. George read through the complete document one final time. This is the most carefully constructed family governance document I've drafted in 30 years, he said quietly. It's also the saddest. When I want them to have every possible incentive to change, I said. And if they don't change, I want Raymond protected from having to fight them for decades. George slid the signature pages across the table. Outside the window, I could hear children playing in the park across the street. Their laughter filtered through the glass as I signed the document that might estrange my own grandchild. But it was also the document that would protect her if her parents couldn't. I signed. George witnessed. His assistant notarized. It's done, George said, effective immediately. I drove home feeling both relief and dread in equal measure. The walls were built. The consequences were architected. Now we would see if anyone chose to respect them. Wednesday evening, my phone rang. Julian, I answered. Yes. The sellers backed out. His voice was flat, exhausted. Too much financial uncertainty, they said. The closing was supposed to be Friday. They withdrew this afternoon. In the background, I heard Celine's voice, sharp, rising. He is ruining our lives. Everything we worked for. Tell him that. I said, Ma, is Indy okay? Silence. Long enough that I thought he might have hung up. Then, she's confused, scared. She doesn't understand why everyone is angry all the time. Why her grandparents live in her room. Why her mom cries. Why, he stopped. I heard him take a breath. I understand why you're doing this, he said finally. That was worse than rage. Worse than Celine's accusations. Julian's exhausted understanding meant he saw the trap, recognized the necessity, and felt powerless to change any of it. Take care of her, I said. I'm trying. He hung up. I sat at my desk with the phone in my hand. The house Celine had been planning to buy with my money was gone. The car I had been paying for was gone. The lake house she thought would be hers was rented to strangers who would care for Helena's garden. And my granddaughter was sleeping in her parents' room, listening to adults fight, learning that family meant chaos and blame. The document George and I had signed was designed to prevent exactly that. To create structure where there was none. To build walls that would hold even when the people inside them wanted to tear everything down. But sitting in my quiet house, listening to the evening settle over Asheville, I felt the weight of what protection cost. Late that night, Raymond called. Dad, something came up. Someone contacted me asking questions about Celine's employer, about her financial situation, about, he paused, about the family generally. Who? They wouldn't say. But they knew specific details. The lake house eviction, the car repossession. The timing suggests they've been monitoring the situation. I sat up straighter. Monitoring how? I don't know yet, but I thought you should know. This might be more complicated than a family dispute over property. Someone else is watching this. I thanked him, hung up. Looked out the window at the dark street. The walls I had built were holding. The consequences were activating exactly as designed. My family was discovering that borrowed money and borrowed time eventually came due. But now someone else was watching too. Someone who knew details they shouldn't know. Someone who was asking questions that suggested this was about more than just a daughter who tried to take her father's house. The architecture was complete. The structure was sound. But I was beginning to realize that what I had built might protect against threats I understood while leaving me exposed to ones I didn't see coming. The phone rang at 11:47 on a Wednesday night, and I knew it was Celine before I answered. But her voice sounded different, smaller, tired instead of sharp. Dad, not demanding, not defensive. Just my daughter exhausted. Celine, I didn't know what Verna was doing. The words came out in a rush. The loan, the signature. I didn't know until the collection calls started. She forged my name. I trusted her, and she used me. I sat down at the kitchen table. The house was dark except for the light over the sink. I know, I said. You know, Raymond found it 3 weeks ago. The loan, the forged signature, all of it. Silence. Then, and you didn't tell me. See, I was waiting for the right moment, for you to be ready to see it. Another silence. Longer. I'm not asking you to fix this, she said finally. Her voice was shaking. I just needed you to know I wasn't lying to you about everything. I really didn't know what they were planning. With the lake house, with the money, with... She stopped. With any of it. I believe you. You do? And about the forgery, yes. About not knowing they were using you as collateral, yes. But Celine, you gave them keys to my house. You pulled money from accounts you didn't own. You knew those things. I know. She was crying now. Quiet crying that came through the phone like something breaking. You were right about the boundaries. I hated hearing it, but you were right. I realized I was hearing my daughter cry for the first time since she was 12 years old. The last time had been when Helena told her we were selling the house she'd grown up in, the one in Charlotte, before we moved to Asheville. She had cried in her room for an hour, and Helena had sat with her while I packed boxes in the garage because I didn't know what to say. I still didn't know what to say, but I was here now. How did you do it, Dad? Her voice was small. Start over when everything was gone. You lost everything once. Your business, your money, everything. How did you rebuild at 60? See, Raymond showed me that pride costs more than starting at the bottom, I said. I was 60. You're 28. You have decades I don't have. I'm so tired, she said. So tired of pretending everything is fine when it's falling apart. The car is gone. The house is gone. The apartment is full of people I can't get rid of. Indy is scared all the time. Julian is... She stopped. Julian is the only one trying to hold anything together. Then work with him instead of against him. I don't know how. Yes, you do. You just have to want to more than you want to be right. We talked for another hour. About Helena. About the mistakes Celine had made trusting the Brennans. About the mistakes I had made assuming silence meant she understood. When we finally hung up, it was past 1 a.m. I sat in the dark kitchen for a long time, thinking about the walls I had built and the daughter who had finally found a door through them. Friday afternoon, I met Julian and Celine at George's office. George had prepared an asset separation agreement. Formal division of any remaining joint finances. 2-year financial mentorship structure. Weekly check-ins with me. Monthly reviews. Full transparency. Julian signed first. His hand was steady. I want to do this right, he said. No shortcuts. If you're willing to teach me, I'm willing to learn. 2 years of checking in weekly, I said. You'll hate some of my advice. You'll follow it anyway, or we stop. I understand. Raymond was there too. He slid a business card across the table. Marketing operations coordinator, Raymond said. Company in my network. Better salary than your last position. Better benefits. They're looking for someone who understands financial software integration. I told them about your background. Julian picked up the card, looked at it for a long moment. Raymond handed Julian the business card like passing a key to a door Julian had to choose to open himself. Not pushing, not persuading, just offering. I'll call them Monday, Julian said. Then he pulled out his wallet, opened it, slid the card into the slot behind his driver's license. Phone contacts disappear, he said quietly. Wallet stays. I understood what he was doing. The deliberate choice, the old-school value, the physical commitment instead of digital convenience. It was something I would have done. After Celine and Julian left, I stayed with Raymond and George for a few minutes. That information I mentioned, Raymond said, about someone asking questions about Celine. I found out more. I waited. It wasn't about Celine at all. It was about Verna. The forgery isn't an isolated incident. There are other victims. The authorities are already involved. Federal investigation into a pattern of identity theft and loan fraud. I sat very still. How many victims? Then at least 5 that they know about. Possibly more. Verna's been running this scheme for years. Different cities, different families. Always using daughters-in-law as guarantors. Always private lenders who don't check thoroughly. Always moving before anyone catches on. And Soleni is one victim among several, but she's the first one whose father had the resources to document it thoroughly. Your evidence, the surveillance, the timeline, the forged signatures, it's helping them build the case against Verna. George leaned forward. The FBI wants to interview you next week about the timeline, about when Verna had access to your family's financial documents, about the pattern of manipulation. I looked out George's window at the street below. People walking, cars passing. Normal Friday afternoon. Normal life continuing while I learned that my family had been infiltrated by someone running a federal criminal enterprise. Will they protect Celine? I asked. From being charged as an accessory, she's a victim, Raymond said. The evidence makes that clear, but she'll have to testify. I nodded slowly. Set up the interview. We left George's office together. Raymond walked me to my car. Julian's going to be all right, Raymond said. He's finally choosing to be. And Celine, one that depends on whether she keeps choosing honesty or goes back to choosing comfort. I drove home thinking about walls designed to protect and doors designed to open. About daughters who finally told the truth and sons-in-law who put business cards in wallets instead of phones. About federal investigators who were building cases while I had been building boundaries. About the fact that sometimes the threats you see coming are easier to handle than the ones that were already inside your house all along. Raymond had called Sunday afternoon to tell me the mysterious inquiries about our family's finances had a source federal investigators already building a case against Verna. The threat I had not seen coming had been watching her, not me. That knowledge settled something I had not realized was still unresolved. The call came from Paxton on Thursday morning, not to me, to his parents. I heard about it from Hayes, who heard it from Julian, who was still trapped in that cramped 2-bedroom apartment with his toxic in-laws. The temporary drywall partitions were thin enough that Julian could hear Paxton's voice vibrating through Verna's phone speaker from the next room, high and frantic, begging them to cover the pawnshop redemption fee before the 30-day deadline expired. Verna refused. Lyle refused. For the first time in Paxton's 24 years, they told him no. Julian said the fight lasted 40 minutes. Paxton drove over in person, stood in their driveway, and screamed that they had always bailed him out before, that this was different, that he would lose everything. Verna told him he should have thought about that before he pawned a painting that didn't belong to him. Lyle said nothing at all. Ophelia left him that night. She did not call me. She did not call Celine. She packed one suitcase, walked out of the apartment they had been renting for 8 months, and moved into a women's crisis shelter 2 counties away. Hayes found out through a mutual friend who worked at the shelter's intake desk. Ophelia had listed domestic concerns as her reason for leaving. Paxton was alone. I did not call him. I did not reach out. I had drawn boundaries for a reason, and sympathy would not rebuild what he had broken. On Friday afternoon, Paxton borrowed $900 in cash from 3 different friends. He drove to the pawn shop in Madison, redeemed the painting 1 hour before the deadline, and left it wrapped in brown paper in the back seat of his car. Then he called Hayes. Hayes met him in a grocery store parking lot at 4 in the afternoon. Paxton handed over the painting without a word. Hayes said Paxton's hands were shaking so badly he almost dropped it on the asphalt. Hayes drove straight to the lake house. He let himself in with the key I had given him in August, walked into the living room, and hung the painting back on the wall where it had always belonged. He stood there for 5 minutes, making sure it was level. Then he took a photograph with his phone and sent it to me with one word: home. I stared at that image for a long time. The painting looked smaller than I remembered, but the wall looked right again. I texted back, "Thank you." Saturday evening I gathered everyone at my primary residence. Not the lake house, not a restaurant, my home. Hayes arrived first, as always. Julian came with Celine. Raymond arrived last, carrying a leather portfolio case I had seen 100 times in his office. We sat in the dining room. I poured coffee. No one spoke. Raymond opened the portfolio and spread documents across the table like blueprints. "Max 6 months," he said. June through November. Every boundary, every test, every consequence. Documented. He laid out the timeline in chronological order. June, initial consultation with George regarding asset protection strategies in anticipation of Celine's marriage into a family with documented financial instability. July, establishment of revocable trust structures for lakehouse vehicles and investment accounts. Execution of durable power of attorney assigning Hayes and Raymond as co-agents. August, lakehouse lease agreement, drafted with Celine as named tenant, including 90-day termination clause and explicit prohibition against subletting or third-party occupancy. Security deposit waived to avoid appearance of financial coercion. September, documentation of first boundary violations. Verna and Lyle's extended stays logged with timestamps. Installation of exterior security cameras with cloud backup. Formal written notice delivered to Celine regarding lease terms. October, escalation protocol activated. Title transfer of Celine's vehicle into irrevocable trust with Hayes as trustee. Repossession executed lawfully under trust provisions. Civil claim filed for $23,247.16 in documented financial damages. November, formal eviction proceedings. Forensic signature analysis confirming loan document forgery. Coordination with federal investigators regarding Verna Brennan's multi-state fraud activities. Raymond looked at Celine. Every loophole you thought you found," he said quietly, "was designed. Every test you ran against his boundaries was documented. Every consequence was architected 6 months before you encountered it." Celine stared at the documents. Her hands were folded in her lap. "You planned this," she said. "No," I said. "I designed it." The distinction mattered. Planning implies reaction. Design implies structure. I had not waited to see what they would do and then responded. I had built a framework that would protect my assets regardless of what choices they made. The boundaries were not punitive. They were architectural. Julian leaned forward, scanning the timeline. "The lease was ready before we even asked about the lake house," he said. "Yes." "The trust was active before the car was titled." "Yes." "The eviction clause was written before we moved in." "Yes." Hayes said nothing. He had known most of this already. Raymond had briefed him in August. Celine looked at me. "You let me think I had options," she said. "Ah, you did," I said. "You could have honored the lease. You could have kept your in-laws out of my property. You could have respected the boundaries I set in June. But if I didn't, then the structure would hold." She understood. Raymond gathered the documents and slid them back into the portfolio. The table looked empty again. "The FBI will interview you next week," Raymond said to me. Verna's case involves at least 5 other victims across 3 states. They will want to know when she had access to your family's financial documents and whether Celine was complicit or simply another target. Celine closed her eyes. I was another target, she said. I know, I said. The room was quiet. Hayes stood first. He squeezed my shoulder as he passed. Julian followed, then Raymond. Celine stayed seated. I need to ask you something, she said. Go ahead. If I had respected your boundaries in June, would you still have built all of this? I considered the question. Yes, I said. Because protection is not a reaction. It is a foundation. She nodded slowly. She left 10 minutes later. I stood at the window and watched her car pull out of the driveway. The taillights disappeared around the corner. I thought about the painting back on the wall where it belonged. I thought about Ophelia alone in a shelter 2 counties away. I thought about the fact that sometimes the structures you build to protect yourself end up protecting the people who tried to break them. Hayes called Sunday morning to tell me the Brennan parents were leaving. I could hear traffic noise through the phone. He was parked 3 blocks from their apartment watching Lyle and Verna load suitcases into their sedan. A federal vehicle sat across the street with 2 agents inside making no effort to hide. Headed to Virginia, Hayes said. Verna's sister lives outside Richmond. They are running. Let them, I said. I felt relief more than triumph. The kind of relief that comes when you finally close a door you should have locked months earlier. 20 minutes later, my phone rang again. Verna. I almost let it go to voicemail. Then I realized this would be the last time I would need to hear her voice, and I answered. You destroyed this family, Mercer, she said. No greeting, no preamble. You turned children against parents. I hope you are satisfied. Her voice was tight with fury, but underneath I heard something else. Fear. I protected the parts of this family worth protecting, I said. The parts you tried to exploit. We gave Celine everything. You gave her debt and forgery charges. Silence. Do not contact me again, Verna, I said. We are done. I hung up. Then I blocked her number. No anger, no hesitation, just finality. I set the phone down on the kitchen counter and stood there for a moment, waiting to feel something. Vindication, maybe. Satisfaction. But all I felt was quiet. The structures had held. The boundaries had worked. The people who needed protecting were safe. That was enough. Monday morning, Celine arrived alone. She was carrying a clay pot with African violets' purple blooms still tight against dark green leaves. I recognized the variety immediately. Helena had kept them on the kitchen windowsill for years, always 3 pots in rotation, so there would be flowers even in winter. Celine set the pot on the counter without saying anything. Mom used to keep these, she said finally. I have not been able to look at them for 6 years without crying. Today I can. I stared at the flowers. Helena had died in February. The violets had bloomed through March, and then I had let them die because I could not stand to water them. Solange had been 24. She had not come to the house for 3 months after the funeral. She would have liked that you brought them, I said. Solange nodded. Her eyes were wet. We stood in the kitchen, not touching, looking at the flowers. We both got lost when Helena died, I said. I buried myself in protecting what remained. You ran to people who used you. I know, she said. I should have seen it sooner. I should have let you. She started crying, then really crying, the kind that shakes your shoulders and makes it hard to breathe. I stepped forward and put my arms around her, and she leaned into me the way she used to when she was small. We stood there for a long time. Indy was in the living room, playing with blocks Hayes had brought over the week before. She looked up and saw us, her face uncertain. Why are you and Grandpa crying? She asked Celine. Celine pulled back, wiping her face with the heel of her hand. Because we are happy, she said. Indy considered this. Okay, she said, and went back to her blocks. It was somehow true. When I am sorry, Dad, Celine said quietly. Not the legal kind, the real kind. Just for us. I nodded. I know, I said. That afternoon, we drove to George's office. Julian was already there, sitting in the waiting room with his hands folded in his lap. He stood when we arrived, shook my hand, kissed Celine on the cheek. We walked into the conference room together. George had 2 documents ready. The first was a formal apology statement for the legal record acknowledging the lease violations, the property damage, the unauthorized occupancy by third parties. Celine read it carefully, then signed. The second was a financial support agreement. Monthly check-ins with Raymond. George said, walking through the terms. Quarterly reviews with your father. Full transparency on major purchases. The structure is designed to rebuild trust over time, not to punish. Celine looked at me. I can live with oversight, she said. I cannot live with the distance anymore. Then we have an agreement, I said. Julian signed a parallel document committing to the 2-year mentorship program Raymond had designed. His hand was steady. No hesitation. George collected the papers and slid them into a folder. But the document is for the record, I said to Celine. The apology this morning was for us. She smiled just a little. I watched her sign the last page, watched the way her pen moved in smooth loops across the signature line. Helena had written the same way, with the same slight leftward slant. I saw my wife in our daughter's handwriting, saw the woman Helena had wanted Celine to become, finally choosing the path that would get her there. It had taken 6 years and 6 months and a federal fraud investigation, but she was choosing it. We walked out together into the late afternoon sun. Julian said something about picking Indy up from Celine's friend's house, and Celine laughed, and for a moment it felt almost normal. George caught my arm as I reached my car. The FBI interview is scheduled for Wednesday, he said. 2 agents my office, 10 in the morning. They are very interested in the timeline of when Verna had access to your family's financial documents. Just the forgery, I asked. No, George said. The case has expanded. Identity fraud, wire fraud, potentially more. They think she has been doing this for years. I looked back at Celine standing beside Julian's car in the parking lot, her face tilted toward the sun. Good, I said. George nodded. Wednesday, he said. Bring everything. The FBI interview lasted 90 minutes. I answered every question George allowed, provided bank statements and timeline documentation, and walked out knowing Verna's fraud operation was larger than any of us had realized. 17 victims across 4 states. The forgery on Celine's loan was the smallest charge on a list that kept growing. 3 weeks later, Olivia called about the lake house. I found your tenants, she said. Olivia Hewitt had been handling estate properties around Lake Lure for 20 years. She knew which houses had history and which ones just had square footage. I had hired her because she treated the lake house like it mattered. Tell me, I said. Teacher and photographer from Atlanta. Mid-30s, no children, looking for a year-round retreat. They asked about the garden before they asked about the rent. I knew they were the ones. I set down my coffee. What about the garden? Whether they could maintain it. Expand it, maybe. The wife is a photographer. She said the light on the lake at sunrise reminded her why she takes pictures. I closed my eyes. Helena had said almost the same thing the first morning we woke up in that house. Spring 2004. She had stood at the bedroom window with her coffee and told me she finally understood why people painted landscapes. They researched the property, Olivia continued. Found old listing photos from when you bought it. They want to honor the original plantings. Helena planted those irises, I said. If they want to care for them, that is all I need to know. I will send the lease this afternoon, Olivia said. I drove to the lake house the next morning. The air was cold enough to see my breath. December in the mountains, the kind of sharp clarity that makes everything look etched. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The house smelled like emptiness, not decay, just absence. I walked through the living room, where the painting hung back in its place. Through the kitchen, where Helena used to leave her reading glasses on the counter. Through the hallway where we had hung family photographs that I had taken down in September and stored in my garage. I stood in the bedroom and looked out the window. The lake was steel gray under overcast sky. The iris beds along the south slope were dormant, just brown stalks and mulch. In 4 months, they would bloom purple and white the way they did every May. I could almost see Helena standing here. Could almost hear her saying the irises would be beautiful this spring. I sat down at the small desk by the window and pulled out a sheet of paper from the drawer. I wrote carefully the way I used to draft notes to contractors. Precise. Clear. Helena planted the irises in 2004, our first spring here. Purple was her favorite color. She said a house on water needs flowers that come back every year. Something that survives winter. Take care of them. They are tougher than they look. I signed it, folded it in half, and left it on the kitchen counter with the house key. Then I locked the door and drove away. Raymond called that evening and asked if I wanted to have dinner. Not a business meeting, not a legal review, just dinner. We met at a restaurant in Asheville, the kind of place with exposed brick and wine lists longer than the menu. Raymond arrived first. He stood when I walked in, shook my hand, waited until I sat before he did. We ordered. We talked about the weather, about Hayes closing on a historic renovation project in Charleston, about Celine's first monthly check-in with Raymond going better than expected. Then Raymond set down his glass and looked at me. "I need to tell you something," he said. "Go ahead." "I stayed quiet this summer because you needed to win this yourself. Not have your son rescue you." I said nothing. "You rebuilt at 60 what took you 40 years to build the first time," Raymond continued. "That is the story. Not me helping. Not Hayes running interference. You proving you could do it again." "I did not do it alone," I said. "No, but you did it on your terms. That mattered." I looked at my son across the table. 43 years old. Chief legal counsel at a firm he had built without my name on the door, without my contacts in his Rolodex, without my shadow over his career. He had protected me quietly from the background, because he knew I needed to be the architect of my own defense. Because he understood that pride was not always weakness. "Chuck, you built something good," I said. "Separate from me. Separate from all of this." "I learned from the best," Raymond said. The server brought the check. Raymond reached for it before I could. I started to protest, then stopped. He reached for it, the way someone reaches for something they have been waiting years for permission to hold. And I realized he had stopped asking for permission a long time ago. "Some things you let your children do." "Dad," Raymond said quietly. "Like pick up the check." I leaned back in my chair. "All right," I said. He smiled. Just a little. The kind of smile that said more than gratitude. We walked out to the parking lot together. The air was cold, sharp, with the smell of wood smoke from someone's fireplace. "Joe Hayes asked me to co-invest in his Charleston project," Raymond said. "First time we have collaborated on anything since before Mom died." I stopped walking. What did you say?" I said yes. I looked at him. "The family is rebuilding," Raymond said, "in ways you never designed, and that is good." He was right. I had built structures to protect what mattered. But the people inside those structures were building something new, something I had not planned, something that belonged to them. I drove home alone, thinking about irises that survive winter, and children who stop asking permission, and families that rebuild themselves in ways you never see coming. Hayes and Raymond signed the partnership papers the following week. I did not ask for details. Some things belonged to them. 6 weeks later, the family came for dinner. It was smaller than the old days, quieter. Just Celine, Julian, and Indy. No extended relatives, no in-laws, no performance of togetherness. Just 5 people around a table that seated 8. Julian talked about his new job. Operations coordinator at a logistics firm, better title and salary than his previous position. Raymond had vouched for his numbers background, and Julian had cleared 3 rounds of interviews on his own merit. More responsibility than marketing, Julian said, cutting his chicken carefully. But I like working with systems, things that have structure, I nodded. Structure was something I understood. Celine set down her fork. I enrolled in a finance course, she said. I looked at her. Raymond's requirement, I asked. No, she said. Mine. I got tired of not understanding my own accounts. The class meets Tuesday nights at the community college. Basic budgeting, investment principles, debt management. She said it without defensiveness, without the edge that used to sharpen every conversation about money. That is good, I said. Indy looked up from her mashed potatoes. Grandpa, my teacher says I am good at art. Can I show you something after dinner? Yes, I said. The conversation moved on. Ordinary topics. The weather turning cold. Holiday plans. Whether Indy's school would cancel for snow. The kind of talk that fills space without weight. I realized halfway through the meal that this was what healing sounded like. Not dramatic reconciliation speeches or tearful apologies, just people practicing ordinary kindness instead of walking on eggshells, choosing presence instead of distance. After dinner, Indy ran to the living room and came back carrying a sheet of watercolor paper, edges curled from drying. I painted this for you, she said. She held it up. The lake house rendered in bright primary colors. Blue water, green trees, an enormous orange sun taking up a quarter of the sky. The house itself had windows like eyes and a red door like a smile. The way children draw houses before they learn houses do not have feelings. Except maybe they do. I painted it so you can always have it with you, Indy said. Even though it is not yours anymore. I took the painting carefully. The orange is beautiful, Indy, I said. Just like real sunsets on the lake. She has been working on that for 2 weeks, Celine said quietly. Would not let me see it until it was perfect. I looked at my granddaughter, 7 years old, gap-toothed, holding a paintbrush the way her grandmother used to hold a garden trowel, creating something beautiful out of what was lost. Thank you, I said. I walked to the kitchen and hung the painting on the refrigerator with a magnet right next to the African violets Celine had brought in November. The violets were still blooming, small purple flowers against dark leaves. Indy beamed. They left an hour later. Celine hugged me at the door. Julian shook my hand. Indy waved from the car until they turned the corner. I stood in the empty house and felt the quiet settle. Early January, an envelope arrived. No return address. Handwriting. I recognized the handwriting immediately, even though I had not seen it in 2 months. Verna. I opened it standing at the kitchen counter. The letter was 3 pages, single-spaced, alternating between accusation and pleading. She blamed me for destroying the family, for turning children against parents, for choosing pride over forgiveness. She asked if I was satisfied now, if it had been worth tearing everyone apart, just to prove I was right. The final paragraph asked if Helena would have wanted this. I read it once, carefully. Then I folded it along the creases and walked to the recycling bin. Not the trash. The recycling bin. Symbolic, maybe, or just practical. Either way, it belonged with the other paper waste not mixed with garbage that required ceremony to discard. I poured coffee and stood at the kitchen window. The African violets were blooming in the winter light, purple petals catching the sun. Helena had kept them alive through every season, rotating the pots, so they grew evenly, trimming dead leaves with precision. 6 years after her death, they were still here. Was it worth it? I considered the question while watching the flowers she had planted bloom without her. I had protected what mattered. Celine was learning to manage her own finances. Julian had stable work and a path forward. Indy was drawing houses with smiles. The lake house was occupied by people who would care for Helena's garden. My sons were working together for the first time in years. Verna had tried to exploit what I built. She had forged documents, invaded property, manipulated my daughter, and ran when the consequences caught up. We were done. Some questions answer themselves. I rinsed my coffee cup and set it in the sink. I looked at the calendar on the wall. January 6th, exactly 1 year since the day I had called George to start building the boundaries. 1 year since I began designing the structures that would protect my family from the people who wanted to use them. I had been quietly keeping track without realizing it. Counting days, measuring distance. But I had also been counting on something else. Days until I could stop being the architect and just be the grandfather. Days until the structures could hold themselves and I could step back. Days until protection became a presence. I looked at Indy's painting on the refrigerator. The lake house with windows like eyes and a door like a smile and an orange sun too big for the sky. That day might be closer than I thought. I picked up my keys and started my day. The transition happened quietly the way most real changes do. One day I was counting days until I could stop being an architect. The next day, I simply stopped counting. Mid-January, I drove to the lake house. The new tenants were traveling for 2 weeks, visiting family in Atlanta. They had left me a key and permission to check on the property. I sat on the porch in Helena's chair, coffee in one hand, and a new sketchbook in the other, watching fog drift across the water. For the first time in 18 months, I was drawing something that had nothing to do with protecting what I had, and everything to do with imagining what comes next. The coffee was hot. The air smelled like pine and cold water. The fog moved, slowly erasing the far shore, and then revealing it again in pieces. I opened the sketchbook to a blank page. "Hi, Helena, you would like these new tenants," I said to the empty porch. They sent photos of the irises already coming up, green shoots through the mulch. The lake did not answer. It never did. But I felt her presence in the light and the angle of the morning sun hitting the water exactly the way she used to photograph it. I started sketching. Not boundaries, not protections, not defensive structures. A small studio space, maybe 12 by 16 feet. Windows on the north side for consistent light. Built-in shelves for supplies. A table that could handle paint and mess and the chaos of creation. Something for Indy. 10 years from now, maybe. When she was older. When she understood what it meant to have a space designed for her work. A place to paint where the light is right, I said quietly. I sketched the proportions, calculated the window placement, and considered the foundation requirements. The same precision I had used to build protections now applied to building possibilities. I spent so long building walls, I said. Time to build a window. The sketch took shape. Clean lines. Functional space. Room to grow. I had been an architect for 40 years before I lost everything. Then I became an architect again, but this time of boundaries instead of buildings. Now finally, I was remembering how to design for creation instead of defense. The fog lifted completely by noon. I picked up Indy from Celine's apartment at 2 in the afternoon. We drove to the lake house together, just the two of us. "The people who live here now are nice," I told her as we pulled into the driveway. "They take care of your grandmother's garden." "Can we see it?" Indy asked. "The flowers will not bloom until spring, but yes." I unlocked the door, and we stepped inside. The house smelled different. Someone else's coffee. Someone else's life. But the bones were the same. The light fell through the windows at the same angles Helena had loved. I led Indy to the study. "Your grandmother loved this window," I said. I built the whole study around the angle of morning light she wanted. She would sit here and read, and the sun would come through just right. Indy stood at the window, her small frame backlit by winter sun. For a moment I saw Helena, 20 years younger. standing in the same spot, telling me the light was perfect. Time was not linear, it was circular. Some things did come back. "Grandpa, can I paint here someday?" Indy asked. "Like a real artist." I looked down at her. "Shakutiontai, when you are ready, Indy," I said. "We will build you a space with the right light. Just like Grandma had. Will it be here?" "Maybe, or maybe somewhere new, but it will be yours." She smiled and pressed her nose against the glass, looking out at the lake. I stood beside her and thought about legacy. Not money, not property, not the things you protect with lawyers and trusts and carefully worded boundaries. The legacy was this: teaching a child that she deserved space designed for her gifts. That creation mattered. That light and structure and intention could combine into something worth building. Helena had known that. I was finally learning it. We stayed for an hour, then drove home. Evening came early in January. By 6 o'clock, the sky was dark. I sat in my study. The same desk where the crisis had begun 18 months ago. The same lamp. The same chair. The same window overlooking the garden where African violets bloomed on the sill. Helena had left them there 6 years ago. I had kept them alive without knowing why. Now I understand. Some things survive winter not because conditions are perfect, but because roots go deep enough to outlast the cold. The violets bloomed in January darkness the same way the family survived the crisis. Not through luck, through foundation. I opened the sketchbook to a fresh page and wrote one line. "A house is not what you build, it is what you protect." I read it twice. Then I closed the book. The lamp cast warm light across the desk. Outside the garden was dark and dormant. Inside the violets bloomed purple against deep green leaves. "Hanam Helena, the violets are still blooming," I said quietly. "You knew they would." I turned off the lamp. The room went dark, except for streetlight filtering through the window. I caught my reflection in the glass, older than the man who had started this journey. Harder in some ways, but also lighter. The walls I had built were never about keeping people out. They were about teaching people how to stay in, teaching Celine that boundaries were not rejection, teaching Julian that structure was not punishment, teaching my sons that protection could be quiet instead of loud, teaching Indy that space designed with care was an act of love. I had built the walls. They had held. The people worth protecting were safe. The people who tried to exploit them were gone. That was enough. I stood and walked to the window. The violets were small, dark shapes on the sill, barely visible in the dim light. But I knew they were there. I knew they would still be blooming tomorrow. 60 years old, rebuilt once, protected what mattered, taught what I knew. The walls would last because I built them to last. And someday, when Indy was ready, I would teach her to build her own. The sketchbook sat open on my desk the next morning, the studio drawing still fresh on the first page. I slept well for the first time in months. No phone notifications pulling me awake, no legal deadlines circling at the back of my mind. Just sleep and then morning and then coffee steaming in the winter quiet. I called Raymond at 9, not about documents. Not about the FBI timeline or Celine's quarterly review or the trust fund administration schedule. I called because Hayes had mentioned the Charleston project was breaking ground in March, and I wanted to know if my sons needed anything from me. Raymond answered on the second ring, "Dad, everything is all right." "Everything is fine," I said. "I am calling to ask about the project. As a father, not as a consultant." A pause. Brief. Then something shifted in his voice, a kind of loosening I had not heard in years. "Makun, we could use a second opinion on the load distribution for the east facade," he said. "Hayes keeps overbuilding for aesthetics. Someone needs to tell him a beautiful wall that buckles under its own weight is still a failure." "Send me the drawings," I said. "Really, Yes, not to approve, just to look, like I used to. He said he would send them by afternoon. We talked for 20 minutes after that about nothing important. The weather in Charleston, a restaurant Hayes liked near the job site, whether Raymond had tried the new coffee shop on Lexington Avenue in Asheville, ordinary conversation. The kind that builds a relationship, the way small daily acts build a neighborhood, quietly, cumulatively, without fanfare. When we hung up, I sat for a moment listening to the house. The refrigerator hummed. A car passed outside. The violets on the windowsill caught the January sun and held it in their petals the way glass holds warmth after a fire goes out. 3 years ago, I had driven 2 hours expecting emptiness and found an occupation. Today, I sat in a house that was genuinely mine quiet, with earned peace waiting for my son's drawings to arrive. The difference between those 2 mornings was everything I had spent 18 months building toward. And to you listening to my story, remember this: protection is not the same as control, and boundaries are not the same as walls. I spent 18 months building structures to protect what mattered, and looking back, I would do it again. But I also wish I had seen the warning signs sooner. Do not make my mistake of assuming family means the same thing to everyone. Some people hear family and think of obligation. Others hear it and see opportunity. Learn to tell the difference before you hand them the keys. The lesson I learned is this: a house is not what you build, it is what you protect. And sometimes protecting what you love means setting boundaries that feel cruel to people who never respected them. I believe God put me through this trial at 60 to teach me that rebuilding is not the same as designing. Every family story carries a lesson if you are willing to see it. Mine taught me that walls built to protect can also teach people how to stay in. If this family story made you think about your own boundaries, I would love to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever had to protect what mattered from people who did not respect it? Share this Grandpa Stories video with someone who might need to hear it. And if you want more stories like this one, please subscribe to Grandpa Stories so you never miss another lesson. Thank you for staying until the very end of this Grandpa Stories episode. This family story, like all the stories I share, includes some fictional elements to protect privacy and highlight the lesson. What matters is the truth at the center, that protection and love are not opposites, they are partners.